Art styles, the bane to every beginner artist's existence. Just scrolling through my timeline, I can find so many different art styles that it's a wonder I haven't fallen to my knees and given up on art entirely. But in my insanity and perhaps sadistic chase after art perfection, I've come to quite a few realizations when it comes to these seemingly unattainable art styles. So in this video, I'm going to talk about a few things, show a few things, and hopefully you guys will end up understanding a lot more things when it comes to, quote, finding your art style, breaking down other art styles, and as the title suggests, replicating pretty much any art style that you find. Now, there's a few baseline things to understand about pretty much every art style out there, and that is that they're all based on the very fundamentals of art that I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of before: lighting, color, perspective, stuff like that. So theoretically speaking, if you're proficient in the basics listed on screen, you should be able to replicate any art style that you want, right? Well, to a certain degree you would be right, but that's not really seeing the full picture, because art isn't just a jumbled up collection of all these fundamentals. Yes, you can master them and you should be able to technically draw anything that you want, but you'll be missing something just as important when it comes to studying an artist as opposed to studying something in real life, that being the artist's intent. Finding an artist's intent is so much more important than you might think, and it's something that I don't see talked about as much because it's always kind of implied but not really explained. So why don't I attempt to explain it right now? As you can probably infer, an artist's intent is what the artist wants to convey when drawing something, but that's a very shallow definition and isn't really going to get us anywhere if you want to replicate a style. So we need to dig deeper. Take this illustration from one of my favorite artists, Dino. What can we take away from something like this? Sure, it's dark and cool and oh wow, nice angel wings, but what can we actually observe from this? Well, from a first glance, I can see that this actually looks more like a sketch than a finished illustration. Note the abundance of sketch lines left over, the monochrome color palette, and the top two wings not even being rendered past a simple shadow layer. This tells me that 1, this was actually a quick piece made in, say, about a day, and 2, the method to create this was actually not as insanely complicated as one might think at first glance, requiring maybe 3 to 4 layers at most, say a sketch, base color, background layer, and then finally one to paint over on top. And this is in no way to say this is a bad piece or anything. If anything, it's one of the things that I greatly admire about Dino, who's able to create something so striking and interesting in such little time. Not to mention, this is just my first observation. There's so many other questions that I can yap about. What kind of brushes did he use to make this? What effects did he use to emphasize the one part of the piece that he fully did render, the face? And how did he intentionally hide the rough parts of this illustration so well to the point where I bet a lot of you guys didn't even notice this angel doesn't have any legs until I just pointed that out. Things like this are what I want you to look for when I'm talking about artist's intent, and I'm not just pulling these observations out of my ass without any evidence. I chose this illustration for a reason, because it's one of the only few where Dino actually shows a time lapse of it making it, where you can clearly see one sketch layer, one base color, and then about a 2 to 3 hour rendering job with some glow layers and some other layers on top, but my point still stands. So what's my point? Finding the artist's intent and making the decisions that they choose is one of, if not the biggest thing that you need to learn beyond just straight up technical ability if you want to learn someone else's style. But I want to take that statement further. I also think intent is one of the biggest reasons behind most beginner artists not knowing how to find their own style. You see, if you're new to art, you have this whole list of things that you want to do. You want to learn the fundamentals, you have all these artists that you admire / watch, and you're just sitting there wondering, how do I stand out? How do I make my own art style more grand, more better than all of these other artists? Or hell, how do I find one at all? But this line of thinking is a bit flawed, because an art style isn't something that you just invent out of the blue. It's a collection of all the little choices that you make along the way that lead you to your own way of making things, and it's because of the fact that you're new that you haven't given yourself the time to explore and make these choices for yourself, and why trying to find a unique art style only 1 to 2 years in is quite a pointless endeavor in my humble opinion. Your quote art style is nothing beyond just a collection of the things that you like to draw in the way that you like to draw them. Going back to Dino, I'm sure the reason he draws in this way isn't because he thinks it's his style, but it's simply the most comfortable and natural way for him to create the art that he wants to make. To onlookers, shading a drawing like this is his signature style, while to him it's just another light layer. So finding what's most appealing to you and just drawing it will eventually lead you to your art style, whether you like it or not. You can't escape what brushes feel most natural to you, what layers you like to use, if you want to use a color dodge or a glow layer for some particular reason. These are all choices that lead you to what makes you unique. Or at least I think. This whole section has kind of just been my opinion. Alright, so let's just say you believed everything I just said, as if I didn't just type it up at 12:39 a.m. on a Thursday night, I guess Friday morning, but what now? What do you do if you can't fathom finding an art style and I just told you that it's pointless to make one early on? Well, it's quite simple actually. Just take an art style that you like the most and steal it. as I've explained, eventually you're going to develop your own habits, and hopefully using this video you're going to steal more than just one art style, to the point that it's probably going to look very different from the original anyways, so what's the harm? It's not like they have a patent over anyone drawing in their style like Nintendo has over Pokemon now, so as long as you're not directly copying their pieces, everything should be a-okay, or at least I hope, or else this video will be pretty bad. So to get started, here's a few of my recent pieces so you guys can get a decent grasp of my general style. A lot of painter-like tendency mixed with sketchy line work, which is quite similar to Dino style, but different in a lot of distinct ways. It probably doesn't have anything to do with what I'm about to teach you guys, it's just a coincidence. Let's just move on. The art style that I'll be studying for the rest of this video will be by Ukitora128706, link in the description, who actually draws a lot of Pokemon fan art. Now, I discovered this artist a few weeks ago from their Mega Dragonite fan art, and instantly this struck me as something that I wanted to try out. This kind of full of hatching texture mixed with chromatic colors, along with other things that we'll explore in a bit, is just very eye-catching, so let's try to replicate it. Now, what I'm going to be doing for the rest of the video is actually pretty straightforward in theory, as it's quite simply to just research first and then recreate the style in the way that I see fit. The goal here is to learn new ways of approaching things, not necessarily to get better from a technical standpoint, so depending on the difficulty of said style, things can be obviously much easier or harder, and success will vary depending on the skill level that you're currently at. It's like if you're in a game and you can change your weapon and playstyle anytime you want, but your actual level and damage stay the same with each one. Some people will prefer the axe while others want to use the sword, but you'll all be doing the same amount of damage, or in this case producing the same amount of quality art as you would with each other one. Now, weird gaming analogies aside, the first thing that you want to do is collect as much material from said artists as you can. Get their illustrations, their work in progress, as time lapses, brushes, anything you can find within say 30 minutes. Then take the illustrations in particular and sort them. I like to sort them by mood to see what choices that the artist takes whenever they want to convey certain emotions, but you guys can do it with whatever you want. Now it's time to actually analyze these things. In my case, what stands out the most to me in Ukitora's drawings are not just the extreme amount of hatching, but the extreme amount of secondary lighting. Every single Pokemon drawn has 2 light sources. Not to mention, more often than not, these light sources are actually cool rather than the typical warm light that most artists, myself included, uses. And in order to compensate for that high amount of cool lighting, a lot of the midtones and shadows are consistently green across a lot of these pieces, though in actuality it's probably more of a gray, but that's another topic. Top that off with varying saturations and the different colors that the Pokemon just inherently are, and you have quite a vibrant palette of colors. Beyond the lighting and colors, there's that texture. If we zoom into it, it actually looks like it's done using a simple round brush, so at the very least I won't be needing new brushes for this. And as much as I find the hatching interesting, what I really need to look for are the areas where they're not, and finding consistencies between those places. Do they leave out hatching in lit areas? Well, not exactly, as it seems that depending on the surface, even brightly lit places also have hatching. What about smooth surfaces? Not exactly either, because hatching is used to show changes in shape and reflections. But the one consistency I have found is hatching is left out of areas where they don't really want your eyes to focus or want you to calm down at. Say parts of a Pokemon fading into a background are left with little detail, or dark spots or open mouths are left empty to serve as a breather between 2 other highly textured areas. Finally, notice the line work, or lack of lines. Every Pokemon has a distinct black line around them, however inside that contour, take for example this Gardevoir, the line art is colored to match the rest of the Pokemon as if it wasn't even there in the first place. Although in some areas they're still noticeably a little bit darker, leading me to believe that they were at least drawn in at some point. So with all of that said, for your own sake, take your time and notice these things, and not just what they are, but what their purpose is. Why leave out line out inside the contour, or why add so much lighting? Because these are the decisions that make this art style what it is. And with even further resources, say a time lapse, which I didn't even have in this case, you would know exactly how they made it. And in just 1 to 2 hours, you went from not knowing anything about this artist at all to knowing exactly how their style was made. So yeah, all that's left to do is... With all my research written down, it's time to attempt making this. Now, I could start with my usual character, but for this time I wanted to be a bit closer to the original vision, so I decided to draw a Pokemon. In particular, my favorite Pokemon, Zorua. I don't know what it is, but this little fox menace is just by far my favorite design. Something about the colors and the shapes just does something for me. But talking about the illustration itself, yeah, I just took all the stuff I talked about in the last section and tried doing it. But what's much more interesting than the process is the result itself. What did I think of the finished piece? Well, it definitely needs some work. Now to be fair, it only took me an hour and a half to make, but when it comes to this style, there's a few things I now know that I need to look for. The first thing being the colors. Because I'm not too familiar using cool lighting and just due to a general lack of planning, the colors ended up a little bit dull, especially on the lid side of it. And while the hatching is very much present, it doesn't contribute as much to a better look because I forgot one of the biggest points when it comes to hatching: shape and contours. Now it's not like I completely forgot. As you can see, I clearly did try to follow the contour and the shape on Zora, but it didn't hit me until halfway through just how important these things were. But let's not be harsh, as this was just a practice run, and normally I would be doing 2 or 3 more of these before moving on to a full piece, but unfortunately deadlines are deadlines and I have to move on. So to make the most out of the little practice and research that I did do, I decided to plan things out much more than I usually do, which, as you guys will see later on, will drastically pay off. For this illustration, I actually started out the exact same as I usually do, completely ignoring the style that I'm trying to study, as it isn't really relevant until later, which may not seem like a big deal now, but small things like these will change the final result into a more of a piece of my style mixed with someone else's rather than just a straight copy of theirs. This proceeded all the way until I finished my base colors, and then things started to change to morph into that style, starting with the outline. So once I did all my base colors, I did just a bold outline around the entire character. I then added a secondary light source from the opposite side that themes well with the chaos going on behind my character. Then, rather than having everything on separate layers like I usually do, I merged the entire character into one layer. Yep, line art and all. Then at that point, all that's left to do is to render the character in the style that I want. Again, keeping in mind all the other things that I've written, the colors that I need to use, the secondary lighting, the hatching that needs to follow the shapes, all of those things come into account right now. And after that, I went on to render the liquids behind the character, but the issue here is that Ukitora has never done any liquid rendering. So what now? Well, why don't I just take a style from another artist, this time being Kan Liu, someone that I made a whole video about just a few weeks ago on the very topic of liquids. This is what I meant earlier by hoping you guys study different styles. There's no artist that has drawn everything in the world, so in these cases just take from another artist to fill in the gaps. You'd be surprised at how well this actually works. Even though these two styles may not match each other, you are now the glue, the piece that makes these two very different styles now coherent. So look, I know the title may seem a bit bold, but the point of this video is not to encourage you to just rip off another artist's style and then become a second, I don't know, Yoneyama Mai or something. It's to tell you that if you feel like you're stuck and your style hasn't progressed, or you don't even have a style, it's completely fine. If not, I highly encourage you to study and take pieces from other successful artists' styles. Hell, it's one of the main ways that I've improved overall as an artist, period. There's so many perspectives and ways that other talented and skilled artists have drawn upon to make their own styles, so why not take the time to explore them? Yeah, that's the video. How do I end this? Oh, I could talk about Silk Song. Okay, so I got to the capital and I'm fighting the two dancers. I'm not gonna say much more than that. I don't want to spoil it, but you guys know what I mean. And I've also been playing 2XKO. That game is much more fun than I thought it would be. Like, the music in there slaps. Like, the first 7 minutes of this video, I've just been 2XKO.